So I'm super excited to introduce our speaker today, Aaron Abke. So a lot of you guys know this, but I'm a huge fan of Brian Scott, and I was listening to all of Brian Scott's YouTube material, and he continuously was referencing Aaron Abke as being the go-to when it comes to so many different spiritual topics. So I started following Aaron Abke on YouTube and started listening to his material, and it is the best out there. Kind of like Brian, and awakening the masses. So he's doing an incredible service for people just like us, providing content to become the best version of yourself and live in your spirit. So I'm so excited to introduce Aaron, and thank you for joining us. If you want to just start by, sharing a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kyle. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, so I was born and raised as a pastor's kid in an evangelical denomination. And I was blessed to grow up in a church that very much emphasized all the right things about, religion, the goodness of God, the grace of God, the love of God, forgiveness, all that good stuff. And, as I got older, I wasn't really ever faced with much of the dogmatic stuff in religion until I got my first church job after I graduated from college. And the church that I ended up at was very fundamentalist and legalistic. And I was confronted with a lot of ideologies that did not line up with the God that I knew in my heart and experienced in my heart. And so after a short amount of time of being at that church, I was kind of forced by life to make a decision of, is this the God I believe in or not? Because it was just increasingly inauthentic for me to be there. And, I made the decision of definitely not. I don't know this God they're talking about here. So I decided to leave, and I moved back to Oklahoma, where I had gone to college, had some friends out there, and just kind of started my own journey of seeking, and was led through many different teachers, starting with like Alan Watts and Eckhart Tolle. And then, eventually found things like the Course and Law of One, and just kind of expanded from there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it seems to me like there's so many different people that are on that journey, where they grew up believing a certain thing, or where now all of a sudden that they're breaking down the barriers. And I know that's my story. Like, I grew up in a very religious upbringing, and I can relate to that on so many levels. So could you tell us a little bit about the material you're putting out there right now for people to awaken? And
Yeah, when I started YouTube, I was very much passionate about trying to bridge the gap between those people who were like me, who were questioning beliefs that they had been given through their life and maybe didn't know where to go. Because if you didn't grow up religious, it's kind of hard for you to understand how scary that transition is. But just imagine your whole paradigm for reality kind of crumbling down and being questioned, and it leaves you at this kind of esoteric crisis of, I don't know if there is a God. I don't know if there is love or goodness. I don't know where I go when I die. And most people don't have a good landing place where they can get answers to these questions and see why, a lot of these things you grew up with in the Christian religion, which was mine, are not like total garbage that have no value, but there's a lot of gold there to be rescued. And we just need to see it in a different light, to see Christ in a different light, to see God in a different light. And then in that sense, you can sort of hang on to a lot of what you grew up with in your religion and use it as symbols and pointers to the divine, but no longer being, enslaved to it. So I started a series called Moving Backwards, which was about, just tackling the tough topics of, does hell exist, biblical inerrancy, the rapture. And from there, I started getting into more law of attraction and stuff. And so my audience initially was like progressive Christians who were looking for like new thought, new age type of thinking. And then as I kind of found the Course in Miracles and the Law of One over the years, I started making videos on that. And it was really the Law of One that I think allowed my channel to become more well-known. I just made a video, I was reading the Law of One, and I was so blown away by the teachings in it. And I thought to myself, like, why isn't everyone talking about this? This is so incredible. So I just thought, hey, why not me?
yeah,
So I made a video on the 7 densities of consciousness, which is kind of like I guess you could say the the crux of the metaphysics of the law of one is the seven densities. And I just had a blast reading this stuff and making videos about it. So I just made the video with no real intention other than to see what would happen. And it kind of like blew up, and there was like hundreds of people saying, "This is incredible. I've never heard this, but it's like I'm remembering it, you know."
Mm.
And so the law of one became my primary audience. I have a probably like 25% people that come from the Course in Miracles. So I kind of, dip my toe into a lot of different circles.
Yeah, yeah. So it definitely seems like you are the law of one kind of guru going around right now. So I'm curious, like, I don't know that everyone in our group knows what the law of one is. But I will say that when I started hearing Brian talking about the law of one and then you talking about the law of one, it resonated as something that I had heard before from some past time. And it was incredible information. So if you could just give like a brief overview to everyone about what the law of one is, and how it's like influenced your spiritual growth.
Yeah, totally. So the law of one is a channeled text from the early 80s. There was a group of like UFO extraterrestrial kind of researchers who were working on channeling because their philosophy, or I guess approach towards ETs was, these are beings that can be contacted, but everyone's looking for like a physical contact, a UFO to come down and land on the White House front lawn or something. And like, that's not how these beings work. They're in consciousness waiting for us to contact them. So they began, cultivating the channeling skills. And after like 12 years of having these group channeling meetings, they were getting better and better at their craft. And eventually they had an entity named that identified itself as Ra that contacted one of actually, I think the only woman in the group at the time, which was Carla Ruckart. And they went, after one quick session, they went, "Oh, we've got something real here." So then they had three people, Dawn, Jim, and Carla, who did a dedicated channeling session to speak with this entity. And out of that came the raw material, the law of one. And basically in the raw material, this entity named Ra, which is a social memory complex, and that's basically an entire planetary civilization of consciousness that is kind of merged into one larger mind, is explaining the nature of the universe and how there is just one infinite creator, and it has created everything we see and experience. Everything we see is the one creator, just dreaming in different forms and whatnot. And so they just keep asking questions about how reality works. And Ra lays out this incredible, almost like dissertation level of the metaphysics of the universe, the most fundamental being those seven densities of consciousness. And what that basically is kind of a map or a blueprint of how the soul evolves through our evolutionary journey. We talk about reincarnation a lot in spirituality. And the seven densities model is just a brilliant way of seeing and understanding how reincarnation works, which is that consciousness kind of evolves through these major phases. And there's seven phases because seven is kind of a number that repeats itself in creation. Sometimes we call it the number of God, right? There's seven notes on a musical scale. And when you hit the eighth note, that's the beginning of a new octave, right? Like on a piano. There's seven colors in the rainbow. And so what Ra explains is just like the musical scale or the color wheel of the rainbow, when you get to that eighth note or color, you're back to the beginning again of the scale, but in a higher octave. And Ra says that's how the universe works. Once you evolve through the seventh density and you start the eighth, well, the eighth is actually the first density of the next universe. And that's something that, we just can't really conceive of because it's an entirely new universe, right? So the reason I love the law of one and I gravitated to it was because it really does give you just a profound sense of peace of mind that other spiritual texts or traditions maybe can't give you in the same way, because the law of one is very unique in the way that it kind of answers all the questions you could possibly have of why are we here? How does creation work? What's coming next? What came before? And it gives you answers that when you read them or listen to them, this is what everybody says about the law of one, right? It's like something in you comes alive to that truth and says, oh my gosh, it's like I'm remembering this. Like I always knew this and just forgot it.
Mm. Yeah. So do they talk about where we're at now in our evolution of density and what's happening?
Oh yes, big time. So we human beings are third density life forms.
Hmm.
The third density is the density where consciousness becomes self-aware. So first density is like when you see a planet forming, Earth, I guess, 4 billion years ago, when it was just like rock, magma, water, and air, those four elements interacting. First density is just the four elements. So it's a state where consciousness experiences pure beingness, pure existence. There's no awareness of self yet, right? Like a rock has no self awareness, but it has consciousness, or it is consciousness. And as those, 2 billion years or so of the planet forming, the rock and the magma cooled off, oceans formed. As oceans formed, microbial life, single cell life was able to form. And that's when the second density of consciousness begins. And that's when consciousness learns growth and movement. So anything that has growth and movement is in the second density of consciousness, all the way from single cells and amoebas through plants, insects, and animals. And then at the phase of evolution where consciousness becomes aware of itself, which is a uniquely human characteristic, right? I think maybe something like 75,000 years ago, higher primates began using language and forming hierarchies. And we understood that I exist as almost like I become an object to myself, and I can contemplate the nature of my existence, right? What's going to happen to me when I die? Where did I come from? Is reincarnation real? These are questions that animals don't have the capacity to ask yet, right? So we are third density beings. And according to Ra, in the year 2012, our planet actually clicked into the fourth density of consciousness. And so now, because the planet has become fourth density, that basically kind of pulls along our human collective into fourth density, because the planet's vibration is actually just the sum total of humanity's vibration, because we are the planet, right? We're her children. So we are now entering fourth density, which is the density of love and oneness. And this is the density where consciousness begins to recognize I'm not actually separate from all these people, all these things outside of me. They're actually all me. They're actually all one being knowing itself. That's a stage of evolution. So I guess I could back up and say, when I use the word density, typically we're used to the word dimension, right? But density is different in the sense that a density is what describes how much light is contained in a specific dimension. You can think of like the frequency, right? How fast light, literally how fast the photon vibrates. And so Ross says that, the fourth density photon is a faster vibration than the third density, and so forth, which means that it has more access to absorbing data, like literally more intelligence, right? More ability for consciousness to express itself. So as we move into fourth density, we're going to see things like social justice reform, humans calling out corruption in politics and government, and you name it. We're going to begin systematically breaking down things that make us separate from one another. It's going to be increasingly intolerable to us, right? And when we look at just recent human history, that's exactly what we see, right? Women's rights, gay rights, trans rights, Black Lives Matter. All these things that we're seeing in the world are a result of our consciousness expanding and seeing that, hey, we don't like this world of separation where we're all enemies with one another. It causes us all to suffer and live in these, hellish realms. We actually want to love one another and help one another. And that's a fourth density characteristic. And so that's kind of the transition that we're in right now.
That is that was such a great explanation. So is this what they refer to as the new Earth? Yeah.
Bingo. Yes.
So I got a story for you real quick. I don't know if you know Cindy Edison, but she channels New Earth energy, and we're a fellowship where what our goal is to raise our frequency. And so we wanted to come up with a workbook for this fellowship. And so I was talking to Cindy Edison because she's going to be speaking at our meeting in probably a month. And Kristen, who's the co-founder of this meeting, said that she always envisioned 7 steps to this workbook. And when I talked to Cindy Edison, she said, "You're not going to believe this. 2 years ago, I got asked by these beings that channel through me to go away for a month. And they wanted to flow through me a 7-step workbook that they were going to use for a New Earth fellowship.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
What a trip.
yeah, so it blew my mind. But in that moment, her and I were like, did we just create a New Earth fellowship? Is that what's going on? So her workbook is all about the frequency. So to get back to your point, sorry about that little side story, but
Oh, that was great.
yeah. Uh, is this why everything is like intensified right now? And there's like, I at least know that everything in my life seems to be manifesting so much faster than, 5-10 years ago. It seems like instantaneous. It's almost out of control at times. Is that what's
Mhm.
happening? That photon frequency is increasing?
Well, so we can also correlate the 7 densities to the chakras.
Mm,
So the 4th density correlates to the 4th chakra, which is the heart chakra, right? Love and oneness.
mm,
Um, and so the way to open the heart chakra, and now the heart chakra there is no most important chakra, but in a sense, you could almost say that the heart chakra is like the most important one because it's kind of the bridge between the lower 3 chakras, the root, sacral, and solar plexus, which are the earthly chakras, you could say, and the upper 3 spiritual chakras, the throat, pineal gland, and crown chakra. The heart is the bridge that kind of unlocks the ability for the spiritual rays to be available. So basically, until your heart chakra is open, you have no ability whatsoever to access any abilities of the throat, the pineal gland, or the crown. And so, to open the heart chakra, we have to do what's called shadow work. And Ra talks about this in the Law of One. They basically break down the heart chakra into 2 basic forms, the outer courtyard and then the inner sanctum. And in the outer courtyard, that's where we are met with all of our shadows, right? Our inner demons, the skeletons in our closet, the parts of ourselves we haven't been loving, the parts of ourselves we judge and then project those judgments onto others. This is why I'm such a huge fan of the Course in Miracles as well, because in a sense, like the 2 texts to me are just like perfect dance partners, because the Law of One explains the model of where we are, and the Course kind of explains how to ascend to 4th density consciousness. And the Course explains that through other people becoming the bridge to that 4th density awareness. Meaning, if I see others as myself, my heart chakra must be open. I literally have no ability to know what oneness is if my heart is closed. I can only see you as separate from me. And if you're separate from me, you're an obstacle for me to overcome. You're standing in my way, right? And in the heart chakra, you actually become the way to my salvation. By loving you, by wanting your highest good, I unlock my heart chakra, and basically giving and receiving are the same thing, right? Giving is proof of having. So if I love you, I must be the source of that love, right? So that's what opens the green ray heart chakra. And in this phase of our collective, we're doing that collective shadow work, right? We don't just get to dance and frolic into 4th density freely. We got to go deal with all the crap and the baggage from 3rd density, from all the wars, the strife, the separation, the calamity, the hatred, the judgment. Humanity's done a lot of really sick, twisted, vile things to one another. And that's our karma, right? Your karma doesn't just poof away. The universe is just. So it asks you to deal with your karma. How do we deal with our karma? Through love and forgiveness, right? So the earth being a being itself, like Mother Earth, you can think of her like an entity. She is doing her collective shadow work as she is in 4th density. And so things like the COVID-19 crisis we're in right now, all the George Floyd stuff, the racial tension, this is all echoes from our 3rd density past. And we have to meet those echoes with love and understanding. We have to forgive ourselves. We have to forgive one another. And so we're in a very kind of delicate time right now where the way we deal with these problems is of the utmost importance, meaning we can't swing so far to the other side of the pendulum and just recreate the same problem, right? So like in the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, there's this tendency to say, well, because we've treated African Americans so horribly, then we should hate white people now. And that's just the same exact state of consciousness of separation, right?
Mm.
We have to see that we are all one with one another. There's no order of differences between us. And so we're just watching our collective work those issues out. And, we're going to see that pendulum swing to each extreme for a while in politics, in government, in the social climate. And that's why you just have to see what's happening and accept it as valid. It's a valid part of our shadow work. If you've taken ayahuasca or something, like, what happens, man. Like, it's messy, right? It's not like a super pleasant experience, but it's the experience you need to have so that you can get into the inner sanctum of the heart, which is where you're met with the love of the one infinite creator, and you can begin radiating that love and embodying it. And so who knows how long our collective will take to really make that transition. I think probably a couple hundred years, in my opinion, before we really understand kind of the game that we're playing, and we can really come together. And when we come together, like, we have no idea what we're going to be capable of in terms of technology and seeding other stars and planets. And the possibilities are literally endless, but first we have to become one, right?
That was just mind blowing. Thank you for that. At this point, what I'll do is I've asked enough questions, so I'll ask our group if anyone wants to ask Aaron some questions. Just raise your hand and don't be shy. Oh, is that Claudia? Claudia, you got a question?
She's raising all the hands.
Yeah.
I was just I was just clapping, actually, or saying, like, yes, that's awesome. That's all the words. So I can have a question. So I do a lot of, like, quantum sort of manifesting, and, like, crazy things, insane things happen that show up. So is it, like, easier to reach the quantum reality now and manifest from there because we've moved into the fourth density? Is kind of that why we're touching the quantum a little bit more?
Yeah, I think we'll see that collectively happening more because of that collective vibration on the planet. But, each one of us individually is not limited by the planet's vibration. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The planet is limited by our vibration. So that's why in the raw material, many times Ra will point them back again and again to this idea that, look, the most valuable thing you can do for the world, for anyone else, is to expand your own vibration. Just grow, just evolve yourself, because every time each one of us expands our vibration, we contribute to the planetary vibration, right? Even if it's a tiny fraction. I myself can't do a whole lot of damage, right, with my own evolution, but hey, let's say we get thousands of people that are all interested in self-improvement and growth and spiritual evolution. Well, hey, we can start really doing some damage, right? We can really raise that vibration. And that's what helps the collective more than anything, because as the planetary vibration raises, other people have access to higher states of thinking and states of consciousness and manifestation and law of attraction. The awareness of that stuff just becomes more natural and easy to access when the planetary vibration is there already.
I think of that thank you, Claudia. I think of that on a micro scale where I've studied, like, a little the Institute of Heart Math, where they talk about, they'll have 4 people in a room, 3 people will come together and do heart coherence. Even if the fourth person isn't doing heart coherence, they will entrain into the other 3 people's rhythm exactly, which is kind of fascinating. So if we can, and it's also like the Maharaji effect, I think it is. Whereas if enough people come together, we can change the frequency of the earth. So hopefully we can continue, groups like this, and, it seems like it's happening, which is cool.
You've seen those studies they've done on those group meditations too, right? Where they'll have like 100 monks meditate for like 3 hours or something, and like the crime rates go down dramatically in that time frame. It's just incredible.
Yeah. Super, like, peace waves getting sent out. Kristen, did you have a question?
I always have a question. So yeah, I was kind of thinking, I was diving into this material a lot, and I was reading a lot about the 100th monkey effect at one point, and she even mentions it in the Pleiadian workbook, and she says that, if a certain amount of the population reaches this elevated level of consciousness, then it almost like it spreads through the collective instantaneously. And I wanted to know what you thought about that, because I know you said you don't see it happening for, you know, like maybe hundreds of years, that sort of like we slowly climb. And I guess I just have this maybe utopian dream that we'll just like ascend or something. We'll just all wake up, like this 100th monkey ripple effect will happen. Think about that.
Yeah, Ra does kind of address that idea where they ask Ra, you know, how long do you think this will take us? And what was the estimate? I think he said between 100 to 700 years before, like, as a collective, we're fully transitioned to fourth density. Like, we don't see any of those old ideologies anywhere, right? Of like racism, prejudice of any form at all. But they ask Ra about like, what are the chances of some global event happening that really sparks a transition for us collectively? And Ra says, absolutely, that's always possible. It's not super probable, but that hope is always there that in one great moment of inspiration, the collective can just kind of leap forward to the next phase. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm totally open to that as well. I think that as we, you know, if we just make our own personal growth the most important thing, and we spread that message of like, hey guys, just expand yourself. We don't need to worry about like getting involved in politics is fine, and protesting is fine, but like that's secondary to personal growth, right? And I think we'll make the most amount of progress the quickest if that becomes the primary concern.
I agree. I agree completely. I guess one of my friends had an experience with Iboga, the plant medicine, and he had that vision on his Iboga journey. He had this vision that basically humanity came to this collective, like basically we were at serious war and we were gonna like nuke each other, and then instantaneously everybody like remembered that they were essentially one essence, one being. And so ever since he told me that, I hold on to that with hopes that, like you said, if each one of us do the work to ascend ourselves, then somehow that will just kind of like ripple out into the collective, and we'll all really wake up. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think too that Mother Earth in her wisdom knows how to move her children, right? And so like things like the COVID pandemic are those catalysts that wake us up. Like, we all know this is the nature of humans, right? We tend to not progress until we are forced to by life. And so, you know, accepting what is so important, because, you know, we're experiencing what we are right now, like this whole crazy year of 2020, because we have to, because we're supposed to. And it's going to be for our highest good in the long run. And in a way, we kind of are seeing a collective awakening, right, through this crisis we're experiencing. Maybe not as extreme as like a nuclear holocaust or something, but every little bit of this collective shadow work is pushing us forward. And so we just have to keep saying yes to it, right?
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, one of my favorite musicians, Trevor Hall, talks about that, how even though COVID, like really, it seems like it stinks, it's like it actually has equalized us as a population. It doesn't matter if you're a superstar musician, you're an athlete, you're whatever. Everybody's kind of abiding by these new, you know, tough circumstances where it's making us more look at each other as equals, which is,
it's showing us that we're all one, right?
Exactly. Now, I don't know how much you've gotten into the harvest. What could you talk a little bit about the harvest? And
Yeah.
what it is?
That's always a tricky subject for people in the law of one, because it sounds like, you know, the rapture or something.
Yeah.
It's just, so like we have to keep in mind when we read the raw material that Ra is just using, like, they don't speak with verbal language, right? They're a sixth density social memory complex. So like their intelligence is so vastly beyond what we can comprehend that when we are channeling them, they're picking up our language and speaking to us like a child's toy or something, right? It's like some primitive mechanism that we're using to communicate. And Ra will often point that out, like, this is such a clumsy medium for communication, because they just use NVC, right? Just telepathy. They just communicate thoughts and ideas and feelings instantaneously. So there's no room for like error or misperception, right? But in language, there's infinite amounts of room for that. So Ra's just using whatever words they find most helpful for the concepts they're trying to portray, right? So like they don't call it the harvest amongst themselves. It's just a word, right? So, and that word, the harvest, just refers to the transition between one density to the next. And so Ra explains how that works in a almost like a clock-like fashion, how, the planets orbit around the sun orbits around the galaxy, and it's actually like a ticking clock. And so every 25,000 years, I believe the precession of the equinox, when the Earth reaches back to the same point in its cycle, it becomes eligible to become magnetized to the next density of vibration if it's at least 51% already magnetized. So you could almost think of it like, imagine if there's a magnet just hovering in space and the planet does this long 25,000 year cycle. And when it comes back, if its vibration is 51% fourth density, that magnet goes and like magnetizes it to the next density level, right? So we have three sort of cycles before that happens. And each 25,000 year cycle is an opportunity for that. And in 2012, we made that return movement and finally clicked into fourth density on our third revolution. So when that happens, the planet is harvested to fourth density. And then each one of us individually, as we go through our personal lives, we are also expanding our vibration. And when we pass on from this incarnation, if your soul's vibration is at least 51% fourth density, then your soul becomes eligible to incarnate to a fourth density planet in a fourth density body in your next incarnation. So the analogy that Ra gives is really cool in the Law of One. He says, imagine it like a spiraling staircase, and the staircase is made of light. And you're walking up the staircase, and every step you take, there's a little more light, a little more density of vibration, right? And so when your physical vehicle passes on and dies, if you have stepped onto the first fourth density staircase, then that's how source intelligence knows you're ready for fourth density incarnation. But each step is more and more light, right? So if you haven't expanded yourself and opened your heart, you can't absorb that light. It's too bright for you, right? So like forgiveness is too difficult. Compassion is too difficult. You're still struggling to move through those lessons, right? So then the source will look at your position when you pass from this incarnation and say, okay, they need maybe one or two more incarnations in third density. So you'll reincarnate, maybe as a human or on some other third density planet. And when you're ready for fourth, you get harvested to the fourth density. It really just kind of represents that transition the soul makes.
Yeah, if that isn't motivation to surrender, I don't know what is. That's cool, man.
Exactly, right?
All right, who else has some questions? We have a little more time. Oh, awesome. I see Bruno. Bruno, I got him. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Today we're here with all this stuff going on there about theory, conspiracy. Sorry, my English is not so good. Conspirationist. You know, these guys that say there's conspiracies everywhere with Illuminatis and that the virus was put on in purpose, where does that all fit in with that stuff? Is there any truth to that, or is it part of awakening, or what do you think? Does that make sense? Question?
Yeah, totally. I don't personally get involved in conspiracies just because to me it doesn't matter either way. Whether the cabal and secret government agencies manufactured COVID in the Pentagon and spread it or whatever, or if it really was just an accident in a lab or what have you, the end result is the same, right? We are where we are with this pandemic and it's doing what it's doing. And I think that people get really interested in conspiracies because that's what the ego loves, right? Ego loves to pretend that it knows and, oh, let me tell you what's really happening. It's really just a kind of a basic primitive survival instinct to want to know, to say that you know. And, to me, there's that quote, what we know is a drop, what we don't know is an ocean, right? It's like, It's always more, I think true knowledge, a signpost of true knowledge is knowing you don't know versus believing you know everything. It's kind of a sign of ignorance to me. So I kind of stay away from that stuff and say, even if that is true, it doesn't actually affect the larger plan of what's actually happening collectively, right?
Okay.
Thanks. Bruno.
Welcome.
Thank you, Bruno. I see Ashley has her hand up.
Good morning. Sorry about
Morning.
that. I'm gonna call. Thank you for that, Aaron. That was amazing. I don't have well, I guess it's a question. So I've been like, I don't know, doing just my work for a while, very delved into the shadow stuff, and just realizing how many of these texts, how many books, how many, so we have, and I love the Transurfing Reality, Law of One, I'm actually not familiar with, but like I see these, reading the Celestine Prophecy, like there's so many different things, and they've been around for 20 years or 50 years or whatever, but it seems like right now all these books and all these groups and all these, it feels like accelerated times, because I was never a YouTube person. I like literally, I don't watch TV, I don't watch movies, media, but when COVID came down, and I actually luckily work outside and I was able to not have to be inside all the time, but I kind of decided, hey, I'm going to go on YouTube and like find out more about the subjects I'm interested in. And just that has been amazing. I mean, I found this group right away, which I'm so thankful for, the quantum healing group. And it's just, I'm just wondering if you are seeing that too, or if you like listening to the raw material here. Again, I'm not totally familiar. I know some of the stuff. It just seems like the same messages are coming from so many different places.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think that if I could give credit to any one particular thing for what has allowed us to evolve so rapidly in such a short amount of time, it would be the internet. It would be the way that the internet has really connected us, right? I mean, for tens of thousands of years, humans had no ability to relate to somebody, one country over.
Right.
All they had in their mind was their ideas about those people. And so that's why going to war was super easy, because you just make them an enemy in your mind. The enemy becomes real and you go act that story out. And now we don't have that ability, right? We can hop on YouTube, social media, and talk with people in every country across the globe. We can see the suffering of other people. And then not only that, but now people like myself and people here, anyone can jump on the internet and make videos, write books. And so we're able to see how much more similarities we are having than differences. And these kinds of materials are just like sparking up like weeds, right? And so I think that will and is really pushing us along in an evolutionary sense.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Before I forget, Aaron, how can everyone in this group like support you and kind of just get in touch or whatever they want to?
I kind of keep it easy for people. I have the same, link everywhere, whether it's YouTube / or Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, my website. It's just Aaron Abke everywhere.
Cool. Awesome. I'm sure you'll be getting some new followers. All right. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have one more question. I know you referenced the Law of One a lot, but are there any other books that you would recommend to our collective to help expand their consciousness, or even videos or anything that you find really inspirational that you think would help us out?
Yeah, definitely. My favorite text is actually A Course in Miracles, believe it or not, just because it's helped me evolve more than anything else has. But, in terms of like recommending books or texts, because everyone's at such a different phase in their growth, the things that I'm reading that are helping me may not make any sense to somebody else. So what I always like to tell people is just follow what resonates, right? Like some people are saying, I hear you talking about Law of One, but I don't get it. I read it. It makes no sense to me. I'm really more into Alan Watts right now. I'm like, then that's the book for you, right? That's the author for you. Keep listening to him, keep reading his stuff until something in you will be ready for what's next. And then the next book will come to you, right? So it's like the texts really find us when we're ready for them. And so, I can give a ton of recommendations. A Course in Miracles, Law of One are my top ones. The Nature of Personal Reality, which is a Seth book. I think the Seth material is amazing. The Wingmakers material is amazing. I love reading books from, Nisargadatta and Ramana Maharshi. Those are kind of my go-tos, but those might not help somebody else at their phase. So it's like, just follow what resonates, right?
Awesome. Thank you. You mentioned a couple books I've never heard of, so I'll be picking those up. So.
There you go.
Awesome. So I don't see any more questions, Aaron. I want to thank you so much. If you ever need anything from the Quantum Healing Collective, just reach out, man. We got your back. That was fantastic. What we do now is we close with a little prayer for all those awakening at this time. That's read by Kristen.
1 second, baby. So with all of that energy and that awesome conversation that we just had and that expanded level of consciousness, we dedicate the merit of this meeting to all of those who are awakening at this precious time. May our efforts to better ourselves help shift planetary consciousness from fear into love. May this energy ripple out into the world and awaken those with closed hearts, illuminate closed minds, and inspire all to live within the presence of compassion and generosity.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I hope you all have an incredible day. Thank you, Aaron, for joining us.
Thank you so much. That was a pleasure. I
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Killed it. See you in a couple of weeks, bye.
Sounds good.